Planned Parenthood Federation of America. Click the link in our description to learn about the financial and emotional toll of abortion-related travel. So way back in 2019, before the pandemic, when we were all 17 years younger, we were beautiful, our skin was glowing, the world was bright, and everything was possible. Donald Trump was president, but we're ignoring that. We released a video about financial realities that are making Americans' lives terrible. And the points in that video still very much hold true, from the overwhelming cost of a college education to major tax cuts granted to the wealthy. But we wanted to take the time to do a follow-up of sorts, especially after some major developments, to put it mildly, in public health and policy that have affected all of our lives for the past few years. It's worth noting that, amongst other things, Roe v. Wade was overturned, which is such a massive step backward in terms of liberty and health and reproductive access that honestly I think many of us naively thought could never really happen. But as we also discuss frequently on the channel, in the face of realities like this, it's not okay to simply throw up our hands and say, well, it sucks now. It's our responsibility, especially if we come from a position of privilege, like myself, for example, to double down our efforts to make things better insofar as we can. So in no particular order, here are 6 financial realities that are making Americans' lives terrible in 2023. Number 1 is burnout culture. So American workplace culture has always really revolved around an idea of overwork and conflating constant activity with a real efficient productivity. Now, some of you might know that we at TFD have taken a lot of really aggressive steps to combat this in our own company culture. We have been on a 4-day work week for about 2 years now. We have 6 weeks PTO for all full-time employees, and we generally try to practice a working style that really emphasizes flexibility and making work not the focus of our lives. But for many Americans, the reality is that overwork and, in many cases, subsequent burnout is more the norm than the exception. According to the American Psychological Association's 2021 Work and Well-Being Survey, 79% of employees had experienced work-related stress in the month before the survey. Nearly 3 in 5 employees reported negative impacts of work-related stress, including lack of interest, motivation, or energy, 26%, and lack of effort at work, 19%. Meanwhile, 36% reported cognitive weariness, 32% reported emotional exhaustion, and an astounding 44% reported physical fatigue, a 38% increase since 2019. And these realities, amongst many other things, led to a mini phenomenon of quiet quitting, a topic that I also recently addressed in a video and I will link in the description. But in general, even if we stay at our jobs, we are in a position where we are constantly being encouraged to put work before our actual lives, which results in realities like about 50% of Americans not using all of their vacation time in a given year. And this is systemic. According to an article from Fatherly.com, out of every country in the world, the average amount of government-mandated paid time off globally is 18.2 days annually. In the US, workers are guaranteed 0 days annually. And as we're constantly talking about burnout as this mental and physical health issue that we all need to be taking care of on an individual level, it's hard not to feel a little offended by the implication that most of us even have a level of control over how burned out we are when this is the work culture that we live in. And speaking of health, number 2 is limits on abortion access. A lot of times when we bring up political topics on this channel, we're told to stay in our lane. But money is inherently political, and it's impossible to navigate the world of personal finance without engaging in these topics. Abortion access, for example, is an issue that affects many, many people at a personal level. And because in addition to being a health and reproductive freedom issue, it's also an economic issue. In fact, the Turnaway study discovered that women who were denied a wanted abortion and had to carry an unplanned pregnancy had nearly 4 times greater odds of living below the federal poverty level than women who were able to have an abortion. And that study was published before the Supreme Court's 2022 decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, which has resulted in state bans that have blocked abortion for more than 21 million women, plus trans and non-binary people. In states where abortion is banned, patients are in crisis. The majority are forced to stay pregnant. Some wage a desperate and costly attempt to get to the nearest abortion provider, scrambling to find thousands of dollars that they can't afford to travel hundreds of miles for the care that they need and deserve. For most abortion patients, traveling out of state for care hundreds or thousands of miles away is not a viable option. Planned Parenthood's new video series, The Heavy Cost of Abortion Bans, illustrates the financial and emotional toll of abortion-related travel and how these bans harm all Americans. Learn more at bansoff.org/travel. And for another bummer, number 3 is the de-unionization of American workplaces. Anti-union, pro-business rhetoric is very common, especially in places like, for example, financial media. And there has been an all-out systemic and legislative assault on unions and general worker power since roughly the Reagan era. Quote, the share of U.S. workers who belong to a union has fallen since 1983, when 20.1% of American workers were union members. In 2022, only 10.1% of U.S. workers were in a union. And a lot of this has to do with the passing of so-called right-to-work laws in 26 U.S. states, which provide, quote, a guarantee that no one can be compelled to join a union as a condition of employment and prevent many contracts requiring the hiring of only unionized workers. They are a point of contention, and many pro-union opponents claim that they are a power grab to undermine the protections of union jobs. Opponents also argue that it allows non-union members to benefit from a unionized setting without paying dues. And these laws don't even work out in the favor of individuals as they purport to. After accounting for differences in cost of living, the Economic Policy Institute found that wages in right-to-work states are 3.1% less overall than wages in states without these laws. And the decline in unions means a decline in employee benefits, such as health care and retirement. Quote, pension rates, for example, are 5% lower for right-to-work states. Less money is often spent on educational assistance, training, and other career development expenses. I should say that there has been a recent resurgence of unionization at places like, for example, Amazon, which is notorious for having pretty terrible labor and environmental practices, amongst other things. But the ground that needs to be made up before America is even anywhere close to its union heyday is still massive. And it's always important to remember that when we talk about the good old days of a thriving middle class that was well taken care of, that could afford to buy a home and support a family with multiple children on just one income, we're talking about the times at which union participation were also at their strongest. We also talked about this in the quiet quitting video that I mentioned and linked in the description, so be sure to check that one out too. And on a similar note, number 4 is inflation and rise of cost of living. So as you may have noticed, we are in a period of high inflation, and we actually have an entire episode of our podcast, Too Good to Be True, coming up soon that dives into this issue in a really deep way. But the inflation rate is currently at 4.98%, which is down from 8.54% at the same time last year, but still high compared to the average inflation rate, which is 3.28%. And according to a January 2023 report from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, quote, although inflation may have peaked, prices remain elevated, with food costs up 10.6%, gasoline rising 10.1%, rent increasing 7.9%, and medical care services up 4.4%. This, of course, hits low-income families the hardest and makes digging oneself out of poverty, let alone an entire family, even more difficult. According to an article from DallasFed.org, prior research suggests that inflation hits low-income households hardest for several reasons. They spend more of their income on necessities such as food, gas, and rent, categories with greater than average inflation rates, leaving few ways to reduce spending. When prices rise, middle-income households may react by consuming cheaper goods and buying more generic brands. But low-income households do not have the same flexibility. In many cases, they're already consuming the cheapest products. And speaking of issues that affect people disproportionately based on where they are on the economic and income spectrums, we have the short-term rental market and gentrification, which is also a topic that we have an entire episode of Too Good to Be True dedicated to. So Airbnb and other short-term rental companies have, in a very short span of time, gone from this cute little way for people to rent out a spare room in their house to tourists who are looking for a super authentic experience in their city, to a behemoth that is completely undermining and disrupting cities and communities, and is also almost entirely the purview of these large management companies anyway. Quote, cities, popular ones especially, seem to fare the worst. In major cities such as Amsterdam, Barcelona, Edinburgh, and Los Angeles, studies on the Airbnb effect have found that over-tourism facilitated by platforms such as Airbnb negatively impacts housing prices in communities. The short-term rental sector is just as affected. Research conducted by the Harvard Business Review across the U.S. found that Airbnb is having a detrimental impact on housing stock as it encourages landlords to move their properties out from the long-term rental market and for sale markets and into the short-term rental market. And another report from the McGill University School of Urban Planning found that in the study period of September 2014 through August 2017, Airbnb has potentially removed between 7,000 and 13,500 units of housing from New York City's long-term rental market, putting extra pressure on a city already squeezed for housing. And of those 13,500, the report found that 12,200 entire house units, as opposed to, say, a room, were frequently rented out in the last year of the study. In the study, frequently rented is defined as housing units available for 120 days and occupied for half of those days. That, researcher David Walksmith found, means that the units may also have been removed from the long-term rental market. At minimum, they are at high risk of being removed from the housing market. Also, many Airbnbs that are contributing to the rise in housing costs aren't run by sweet little families looking to rent out their spare room. Many are owned by huge corporations, and some are even run illegally. In 2019, NYC busted an illegal Airbnb empire that accrued $5 million in revenue before getting caught. And lastly, number 6, kind of more generally, is just rampant misinformation, especially around finances. And of course, public health, but that is just not as much my wheelhouse, so I won't be getting into that. So anyone can give advice on the internet, more or less, and especially with platforms like TikTok, which totally ignore nuance in favor of whatever will be most attention-getting in these very short little clips, have created a perfect storm wherein people who have absolutely no expertise on a matter are able to accrue massive followings and become trusted authorities on subjects where they're often giving actual misinformation, if not explicitly trying to sell some kind of snake oil. For example, on places like TikTok, there are huge issues with, if we go back to the previous point, people who are essentially gurus on how to become Airbnb hustlers, and we do talk about that phenomenon in Too Good to Be True. But there's also plenty of terrible investing advice and advice on things like individual stock picking, which we've discussed many times on this channel, is always a bad thing, even when you're not doing it with things like hyper-volatile cryptocurrency, which was also a hugely popular topic on these platforms. If you want to see examples of these things and why they're bad, The Plain Bagel here on YouTube has a great series where he reacts to investing TikToks. According to one analysis, which scraped and assessed 1,212 posts from personal finance influencers on TikTok, found that 1 in 7 posts contain misleading advice. Opportunistic creators are capitalizing on this inbound traffic with a flood of investing recommendations, but many of these posts err on the side of false advertising and can actually expose a creator to potential legal action. And misinformation is rampant everywhere online, thanks to our dedication for free speech and upholding corporate interests, but it's likely even worse on TikTok than other social media platforms. Quote, according to a new report from Global Witness and NYU's Cybersecurity for Democracy team, TikTok is absolutely terrible at filtering out harmful misinformation regarding elections and politics. The report actually tested TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube, all of which performed pretty poorly at detecting and removing misinformation-laden advertising content uploaded by researchers. Out of those, TikTok proved to be the worst. After uploading droves of ill-informed, potentially dangerous advertisements for approval, researchers found that 90% of those fake ads were ultimately approved by the popular video app. Now, I don't say all of this to get us into a really despondent space. Ultimately, America is my home. It's the country I live in. It's a country I love, and it's full of just absolutely wonderful people who deserve to live better lives and have, quite frankly, better policies in place, because there's simply no reason that any of the things I talked about in this video or the one in 2019 have to be the case. We deserve nice things, and we can have them, but they're not going to happen alone. Most of these issues that I talked about are at their core policy failures or actively damaging legislation that was able to pass because of who is in charge. It might sound like a cliche, but I have to encourage everyone, if you're not already, get as involved as you possibly can in the political process, because although these elections may not seem like a big deal, as we saw with the fall of Roe v. Wade, decades and decades of progress can be wiped out in an instant if the wrong people are in power. And now it's time for our Society Questions of the Week. For those who don't know, every week on my Tuesday show, I answer 2 questions asked to me by members of our society at TFD, which comes with tons of other benefits besides just asking these questions. And you can join by hitting the join button right below this video or by joining us at Patreon, which is also linked below the video. Today's first question says, my lovely, wonderful friends just got me an immersion blender for my birthday. I decided I wanted one from your recommendation. Thank you. Do you have any favorite recipes to use it for? I use my immersion blender for anything. Like, I use it for, I would say soup's probably the most common thing that I use it for. I love making a nice smooth soup with it. Can't go wrong with that. But I mean, I don't really think of my immersion blender in terms of the recipes that I use it for, because I use it for so many different things at given times. I also have sometimes used it to make, I've gotten into making chopped salads. I like using my immersion blender for that with a really big mixing bowl. It's really effective and does the job a lot faster than having to do a million hours of knife work. So I guess those would be my answers. But, you know, the sky's the limit with a good immersion blender. I call it the boat stick, actually, a lot. The second question says, how do I start talking to my parents about their own retirement? We've never broached the topic, and I'm afraid they haven't planned for it enough. I think you're really kind of saying it all right there. Say, obviously, I love you guys so much, and I want your retirement to be as amazing as it can be, and I want to do anything that I can to help. And I've been, learning a lot about personal finance and about investment and retirement and all that stuff. And I'd love to be able to help in any way I can to make sure that we have just all of us a really solid plan to put you guys, to kind of set you guys up for where you need to be to have the retirement that you deserve. Are you guys open to talking about it? I'd love to share some of the stuff that I learned. We can run some numbers and kind of see where we are so that, we're all on the same page. But yeah, all you can do is try. Some parents will reject that conversation. Some parents are really, really sensitive about it. They are very closed off to it. And there's, all you can do is offer help and do so in a kind and empathetic way, knowing that it can be a sensitive topic for some people. And give yourself kind of the grace of knowing that if they say no, it's not your fault. That's what I would say. As always, guys, thank you for watching, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and to come back every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday for new and awesome videos. Goodbye. Hey guys, it's me, Chelsea from The Financial Diet. And this week's video is brought to you by ourselves. I wanted to talk to you guys really quickly instead of a normal ad about the very exciting thing that we're launching here at TFD, which is our all new Patreon. So we are expanding our membership, the Society at TFD, over to Patreon. If you are already a member on YouTube, you don't need to move over. It's not going anywhere. We're just expanding